Thank you very much, and thank you for the warm welcome. Could I just do a bit of a survey to start off with? Who, and feel free to put your hands up here, who thinks that the reason that we've got the restrictions on coal seam gas in this state, the 2-kilometre buffer that was mentioned, and no coal seam gas in the wine growing areas of the Hutton or the thoroughbred breeders area, who thinks that that's a result of the federal government's sensitivity to the needs of the community and the fact that they're really very concerned about coal seam gas, and from now on will address this issue aggressively and determined to achieve a really good outcome for the people of New South Wales. Can I see please who believes that? Oh, okay. All right. Well, who believes then that the reason that we've got these good new policies is because we have a really rational and science-based policy-making system here in New South Wales, and that finally triumphed, and we've now got some reasonable policies, and we'll go on to get some more. Who believes that? Can I put your hand up? Okay. Well, it just so happens I agree with you. It's neither of those two things. It's absolutely neither of those two things. The reason that we've even got what we've got so far, which is still inadequate, is that people around this state stood up. They stood up in their thousands, and they said, we don't want it. Not only did they say we don't want it, but they said, we're going to lock our gate and prevent these companies from coming onto our land, and if need be, we're going to stand in front of that gate and physically prevent them coming on our land. And they stopped it. And you know where they really stopped it most effectively? It's not here, you can still get it, not even necessarily in the wine growing areas of the Hutton, because they still could get it. It's in northern New South Wales, in the northern rivers, because they blockaded these companies. Every time they took a drill rig out, there was 300 people to stop them. 300 people, plenty of whom were prepared to go and get arrested. Metgasco tried to bring a drill rig into Glenorchy. They turned out there in their dozens, in their hundreds, to stop them. People locked on. People brought a crazy old car in and locked it at the front gate. They did the same at Doubtful Creek, only with 300 people that time. Even at Doubtful Creek, up until a couple of days ago, even though we called off the blockade, it was all gone. 80 locals were still turning up. They were determined to lock them in. So they could, not only were they being locked out, once they got in, they got locked in. So they fought. Metgasco fell over, they won. And that's how this fight will be won. It won't be won because we've got governments who are sensitive to the community and realise that this needs to be addressed because it is such an important issue. And it won't be won because we've got rational decision-making processes based on science and common sense, because that doesn't exist. We've got an environmental impact assessment system in this state and in Queensland and probably every other state, which is a joke and which is completely biased in favour of these resource companies. We will get there because people stand up and fight. Now, I was interviewed back in, nearly 3 years ago now, by Alan Jones actually. I was a bit tremulous about going on Alan's show, but he and I are from different parts of the political spectrum, but I went on and he said to me, how did you do this in the first place? How did you get this movement started? I said, well, I come from out west, so I know the people out there, so despite the fact I'm a greenie, I went out there and I talked to farmers and I said, well, I'm here to help, what do you want? And so I started working with them, but I realised that it wasn't going to be won as a farmer's issue. Couldn't be won west of the Great Dividing Range. And it wasn't going to be won as a traditional environmental campaign. Our opponents were too big, too powerful. So I decided to bring the two together. Traditional enemies, but bring them together. And bring them together around a common cause. And that common cause could be summed up in one question. Do you love this country? Do you love the country? Because what you've got ahead of you, if you allow the resources sector, totally coal mining and coal seam gas in particular, if you allow them to sweep across the land like a tsunami, then you will destroy what makes this country so special. You will destroy the landscapes which have been part of this nation for so long. You'll destroy our food bowls, our underground water system, some of our most beautiful wild places, some of our most thriving local communities, our cultural heritage, both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal. You will destroy them. So we brought people together. We brought farmers, environmentalists, city people, country people, professional people. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your politics are. It doesn't matter whether you're young or old. It doesn't matter what your cultural background is. If you love this country, you'll fight for it. And by fighting for it, you'll win. And only by fighting for it. You won't win if you simply write polite letters to politicians. You won't win if all you do is sign a petition every now and then. You have to put your body on the line. You have to be out there fighting with the people whose land is being threatened by these processes. You have to go and talk to your neighbours, talk to people in your local community, get them active. It is activity, activism, which will actually win the day for this. Now, you do have to talk to politicians though, but you don't talk to politicians without having leverage. You don't talk to political parties without having leverage. And that's what the Lock the Gate campaign's been about from day one. You never negotiate from a position of weakness. If you're coming from the community, you never negotiate if you're in a weak position and your opponents, like these huge multinational corporations, the Shells, and the ConocoPhillips, and the PetroChinas, and the Chenois, and the BHPs, are in such a powerful position. You go and you mobilise the community. You get people power in action, and then you go to the politicians, and you say, this is what we want. And that's what we've done in this campaign, and that's why the politicians and the political parties and governments are moving now. Because they know that we now have the bulk of public opinion behind us. Even the coal seam gas's own PR company, Crosby Textor, did a poll the other day of people in New South Wales to find that 58% of the people of New South Wales say coal seam gas is a very bad idea and 27% support it. And that's Crosby Textor, that's the coal seam gas industry's own PR company doing that. Imagine if it was a real company doing it, what they would find. They would find what we're finding. That over 90% of people are saying, we don't want coal seam gas, we don't like what it portends, we think that it represents an unacceptable risk to the community. So we presented to the political parties about 10 days ago what we call our call to country. Our call to country. It resurrects that whole idea that if you love this country, then you'll start fighting for it. And it's about time the politicians started fighting for it. And we presented to them a passionate call for action on the part of governments and political parties. And we're saying that you need to put in place things like a genuine no-go areas where mining simply doesn't go. It's incompatible with other land uses like tourism, like agriculture, like our special wild places. It should be no-go. You should be able to put lines on a map and say they're protected. We should be able to have proper environmental assessment processes instead of the joke that we've got now. We should have the federal government involved in protecting our water. On the driest continent on earth, it makes no sense at all to be hauling out millions and billions of litres of water from our underground water systems, polluting those systems, depleting them, and endangering our catchments. It makes no sense at all to put our most beautiful, productive agricultural areas in peril because of coal and coal seam gas mining. And the federal government needs to get involved in protecting those things because this is a national issue. It is a national issue. It's a call to country. It's a call to country. If you love the country, you'll fight for it. Now, we've had the federal government move, only a little bit, but they have said we will introduce a water trigger in our federal environmental legislation. That's a good starting point. That's a good first step, because that means now that state governments, which have got a vested interest in getting these projects approved because they want the quick flush of funds that comes from royalties, they want that, and they don't care what the collateral damage is. So you need to have another set of eyes on the whole approvals process that can see the bigger picture, that can say we're thinking of this in terms of the country as a whole, not just on a narrow vested interest term. Hey, can I just say, as a bit of a distraction on this for a moment, that it's not just simply that these state governments are wanting a quick flush of funds. There is an open door between the major political parties and the industry, and people go backwards and forwards between them both. And in my home state of Queensland, it is at such a degenerate point of view, it's at such a degenerate stage that one of the coal seam gas companies even provided the state government, the new state government, the Liberal National Party government of Queensland, when it had just come to power and sacked a whole lot of public servants, one of the coal seam gas companies provided the Queensland LNP government with a whole bunch of employees on secondment to take over roles from people who'd just been sacked. How about that? Isn't that the most disgusting thing you've ever heard? As well as that, the previous Labor government, as well as what you've got here in New South Wales with ICAP, previous Labor government in Queensland actually broke the law in approving some of these, two at least, of the big coal seam gas projects in Queensland. Two $20 billion projects. They broke the law. They were in such a rush to get them through, get them approved, that they broke the law in doing so. And that is now currently before the Crime and Misconduct Commission in Queensland. So what we've got here is not only an environmental issue, and not just a farmers issue, but it's also a governance issue. Because we've allowed this country to become captured by some of the major corporate interests, especially in the resources sector, who've got most to gain from trashing the country, from destroying our beautiful landscapes and our rural communities in particular. So any social movement like ours will not only bring with it a protective ethos which says we have to protect these things which are so valuable to us in our landscapes, in our environment, with our water and so on, but we also need to rejuvenate our democratic systems. We need to make sure that we have governance in this state and in this nation which is far more responsive to the people instead of the multinational corporations who get their ears, get their influence, and sometimes even get their money. And that's what Lock the Gate is going to do. Lock the Gate has become a term now which I really approve of. It just doesn't simply mean shut people out. That's what it meant when we first started. In fact, when I put the idea up to some of my farmer friends back in Queensland, some of the groups that we had, I suggested that we call it Shut the Gate. And they said, no, we're not shutting the gate. Everyone in the country shuts the gate. We're locking the gate. We're locking it. We're stopping them. We're stopping them from coming in. But you know, people in the country are very polite, and they actually like having visitors. They just, you know, as long as they're people that they like, and people who aren't going to bring destruction to them. So, Lock the Gate, really, instead of being a hostile and aggressive phrase, has come to mean protect. Lock the Gate means protect. You know, and in fact, I've even heard people in the media using the term in that way. I'm going to lock the gate on this. It means I'm going to make sure it's protected, that no harm comes to it. Lock the Gate